The hallway outside room 34 hummed with quiet. Behind the door, voices drifted, students reading aloud, the teacher correcting pronunciation, laughter that wasn't cruel yet still left her out. Lyra sat on the floor, back against the wall, notebook on her knees. She wasn't skipping class, she had been sent out. Again. 5 minutes ago, she had raised her hand, gently, like always. The question was about symbolism in Chekhov's The Lady with the Dog. Lyra had read it 3 times. Her fingers hovered in the air, waiting. Mrs. Gromova didn't even glance at her. Instead, she called on Dennis, who was busy drawing something obscene in his textbook. "Let's hear from someone less predictable, shall we?" the teacher had said with a smirk. The class chuckled. Lyra felt her cheeks burn. When Dennis predictably fumbled, Mrs. Gromova sighed, turned back to the board, and said, "You know what, Lyra? Why don't you take a break? Step outside and reflect on the importance of being humble." That was it. No yelling. No detention. Just exile, soft, subtle, humiliating. Lyra didn't argue. She never did. She picked up her notebook, walked out, and sat down in the hallway. Her stomach twisted, but she told herself it didn't matter. She was used to being ignored. It wasn't even the first time she'd been pushed out for trying too hard. She had learned long ago that being smart only counted when boys did it, or when the teacher liked you. And Mrs. Gromova didn't like her. It wasn't personal, exactly. More like, ideological. Lyra was too serious, too quiet, too strange. She didn't giggle with the other girls or copy homework. She read books that weren't assigned. She thought deeply, spoke carefully, and didn't laugh at cheap jokes. That made her suspicious. A noise pulled her out of her thoughts. Footsteps. Someone coming. She sat up straighter, wiped her eyes with the sleeve of her sweater. The last thing she needed was someone seeing her like this. The footsteps passed. No one looked her way. Lyra exhaled. She opened her notebook and began to write. Not notes. Not homework. Just words. Thoughts she couldn't say aloud. If I disappear, will anyone notice? Or would they just be glad the seat is free? Her pencil moved slowly, the graphite smudging under her palm. Writing made things quieter inside her chest. She didn't know that someone had seen her after all. The day went on, the way school days do, bell after bell, dull lessons, noise in the hallways. Lyra moved through it all like a ghost. Not spoken to. Not missed. At lunch, she sat at the end of a long table, far from the loudest group. Her tray held soup and bread, both cold. Across the room, groups of students clustered, laughing, trading gossip, showing TikToks under the table. No one looked her way. She didn't mind, or at least she told herself that. She took out her book, To Kill a Mockingbird, in English. The library only had one copy, and she had begged the librarian to let her take it home. She loved the way the language bent, how it said more between the lines. She felt understood by books more than by people. Someone sat down across from her. She looked up, startled. It was Kira, glossy black hair, perfect nails, always surrounded by friends. Queen of the class. The last person Lyra expected. Kira didn't say anything for a moment. Just stirred her tea with a plastic spoon, eyes flicking toward the book. "You like that?" she asked, her tone unreadable. Lyra nodded. "Yeah. A lot." Kira shrugged. "I tried reading it once. Too many words." Silence. Lyra turned a page, trying not to seem awkward. She didn't know what this was, a trick? A dare? Kira leaned in slightly. "You know Mrs. Gromova hates you, right?" Lyra blinked. That was blunt. "I guess," she said carefully. She doesn't like people who don't suck up. Kira interrupted. Yeah. Or who make her feel stupid. Lyra's fingers curled tighter around the edge of the book. No one had ever said it like that. Out loud. Especially not someone like Kira. Why are you telling me this? Lyra asked. Kira gave a small, crooked smile. Just thought you should know you're not crazy. Then she stood up, picked up her tray, and walked away. Lyra stared after her, confused. The interaction had lasted barely 2 minutes, but it cracked something, a tiny line in the glass wall that had separated her from everyone else. Maybe she wasn't invisible. That afternoon, during art class, the teacher assigned a new project, Draw Your Truth. Most students groaned or rolled their eyes. Lyra didn't. Her heart jumped. She stared at the blank paper, then at the stub of her pencil, the one she had picked up in the hallway earlier. Its tip was worn, but it would do. She began to sketch. A girl, standing at the edge of a crowd. Everyone else's faces blurred, only hers clear, but not smiling. Her eyes looked out at the viewer, full of silence. She didn't notice the boy watching her from across the room. The next morning began like all the others, the same gray sky, the same heavy backpack, the same silent walk to school. Lyra moved through it all like she was half asleep, her thoughts still lingering on Kira's words and that strange sense of being seen. In art class, the teacher collected the drawings from yesterday's assignment. Lyra handed hers over hesitantly, bracing herself for the usual dismissal. Instead, the teacher paused, looked at the picture a second longer than normal, then gave a short nod. No smile. No praise. But no critique either. That was new. As she turned to go back to her seat, she caught a glimpse of him again. Kirill. He sat in the back corner of the room, half hidden by a tall plant and stacks of forgotten cardboard. He wasn't one of the loud kids or the problem ones, he was just quiet. Always scribbling something in his notebook, always looking out the window like he was somewhere else. He'd been in her class for years, but they'd barely spoken. Today, though, something was different. He looked up, just as she passed. Their eyes met. Not for long. Barely 2 seconds. But in that tiny space of time, Lyra felt something pass between them. Recognition. Like two people who'd both been holding their breath. She walked back to her desk with her heart strangely loud in her ears. During the last period, biology, Mrs. Shevtsova announced group work. Find a partner, she said with the fake cheer of someone who already knew the class would do anything but that. Lyra looked around, as always, last to be picked. Most pairs were already forming, best friends, gossip duos, seat neighbors. The usual shuffle. She quietly gathered her things, prepared to work alone, when she heard a voice. Do you wanna pair up? She turned. Kirill. He was standing next to her desk, not quite meeting her eyes now. One hand was tugging at the sleeve of his hoodie. She nodded before she could overthink it. Okay. They sat together in silence for a few minutes, flipping through pages about cells and osmosis. It felt surreal, not the assignment, but the fact that someone had chosen her. Finally, Kirill said quietly, "You're drawing." Yesterday. It was real. Lyra blinked. You saw it? He nodded. Yeah. I was going to draw something similar, but I didn't. Why not? He shrugged. Didn't feel brave enough, I guess. That sentence hit her like a sudden gust of wind. Before she could answer, Mrs. Shevtsova called out across the room. If anyone's just pretending to work, I'll switch your partners. A few students snickered. Kirill smiled faintly. Lyra looked at him and asked, "What were you going to draw?" He hesitated. Then, slowly, he pulled a folded paper from his notebook and slid it toward her. She unfolded it. A rough pencil sketch, a boy inside a glass box. Cracks forming around him. And in the corner, a faint hand reaching in. She stared at it. It was imperfect. But it was beautiful. When she looked up, he was watching her. For the first time in months, Lyra didn't dread walking into school. It wasn't that everything had suddenly changed, the halls were still crowded, the jokes still loud and careless, the teachers still sharp when they wanted to be, but something inside her had shifted. Like a small light had turned on in a dark room. She and Kirill began sitting together when they could. It wasn't dramatic or obvious. Just quiet moments, in the library during study period, sketching side by side in art class, a nod in the hallway. They didn't talk much at first. But when they did, it felt real. Kirill didn't ask dumb questions or give advice she didn't need. He just listened. When she mentioned how Mrs. Gromova had marked her paper with red ink so thick it bled through the page, he didn't say, "That's just how teachers are." He said, "That sucks. You deserved better." And somehow, that was enough. On Friday, something strange happened. Lyra was called to the office. It was unexpected, and as she walked the narrow hallway toward the glass door marked administration, her stomach turned with old fear. Had she done something wrong? Inside, the school psychologist sat behind a desk, too smiley and overly gentle. "Lyra," she said, folding her hands. "We just wanted to check in. A few teachers have mentioned you seem withdrawn." Lyra blinked. "I've always been like this." The woman smiled with her eyes slightly narrowed. "But lately, there's been concern about your adjustment. Socially. Emotionally." Lyra stared at her, stunned. "I'm not," she began. Then stopped. What was she even supposed to say? That it wasn't her? That it was the system? The woman leaned forward slightly. Sometimes, when students isolate themselves, it can be a cry for help. The words hit Lyra like ice down her back. "I'm not asking for help," she said quietly. "I'm asking to be left alone." The woman gave a soft sigh. "We just want you to feel safe and normal." That word again. Lyra stood up, pulse hammering in her ears. "Maybe the problem is what you think normal looks like." She left before the woman could respond. Later, after school, she found Kirill waiting by the back gate. "I heard they called you in," he said. "Are you okay?" She looked at him for a long moment. And then, without warning, she laughed. Not because it was funny, but because it was absurd. Her first real laugh in weeks. "They think I'm the problem," she said. "Isn't that wild?" Kirill gave a slow nod. "That's usually how it goes." They walked in silence, the cold air burning their cheeks. The sky was low and gray, the kind of gray that pressed on your shoulders. Still, Lyra felt something loosening inside her. "Hey," Kirill said after a while. "Have you ever thought about writing it down? Everything. What's happening? The way they treat you." Lyra looked at him. "What would be the point?" He shrugged. "Not for them. For you. Or, for someone who might need to read it." She didn't answer. But that night, in her room, she opened a blank Word document. At the top, she typed one sentence. "This is not a story about being broken. This is a story about being silenced." And then speaking anyway. She stared at it. And hit save. Monday started like any other day. Rain tapped against the classroom windows, and the smell of wet coats and dusty radiators filled the air. Lyra walked into class, shoulders slightly straighter than before. She had slept little, but her mind was buzzing. The Word document on her computer now had 3 pages. 3 pages of moments, memories, names, phrases she'd been too afraid to say out loud. She didn't know yet what she would do with it. But the act of writing was already changing her. That morning, Mrs. Gromova returned the class essays. Lyra took hers without hope. When she turned the paper over, her stomach sank. A red 2/5 stared up at her, circled twice. The comment beside it read, "Again, too abstract. Do try to express yourself in a more feminine and appropriate way." Her hands trembled. She had written about loneliness, about what it means to sit in a room full of people and feel invisible. About how systems built to educate could just as easily erase. The class moved on, but Lyra couldn't. When break came, she didn't go to the bathroom. She didn't go to the hallway. She stayed. And then, without planning it, without even fully knowing why, she walked up to the front of the classroom, where the essays were stacked. Mrs. Gromova looked up, irritated. "Yes." Lyra held up her paper. "Can I ask you a question?" The room stilled. Everyone turned. It was rare to hear Lyra speak, let alone confront. Mrs. Gromova narrowed her eyes. "Make it quick." Lyra swallowed. Her voice shook, but it was clear. "Why is my essay marked down for being honest?" The teacher blinked. "Because it's not the place for drama. We are studying literature, not indulging in teenage feelings." Lyra stood taller. "So when boys write about war and anger, it's profound. But when I write about isolation and silence, it's emotional noise." A silence fell so heavy it hurt. A few students looked away. Some watched, frozen. Mrs. Gromova's face hardened. "That is enough, Lyra. Sit down before I send you out again." But Lyra didn't move. Instead, she said, louder, "You humiliate me in front of everyone. You ignore me when I know the answer. You punish me for being myself, and I've had enough." Her heart was pounding so loudly she couldn't hear the gasp that went through the room. Mrs. Gromova's voice cut the air like glass. "Leave. Now. And don't come back until your parents are here." Lyra didn't leave. She placed the essay on the teacher's desk, turned to the class, and said, "I'm going to write about this too. Every word." Then she walked out. Down the hallway. Past the office. Past the windows streaked with rain. She didn't cry. Not this time. At home that evening, she found a message in her inbox. It was from Kira. "Everyone's talking about what you did. And guess what? Some of them agree with you. Even if they won't say it yet." Then, a second message appeared. "You're not crazy. You're just first." Lyra stared at the screen. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard. And then, she clicked, "New document." By Tuesday, the school was buzzing. Whispers followed Lyra through the halls, not the usual mocking kind, but something different. Curious. Odd. Cautious. Her name was on everyone's lips, and not because she'd won anything or done something good. She had spoken. To a teacher. In front of the class. And not just any teacher, Mrs. Gromova, the untouchable queen of cold smiles and iron grades. In the cafeteria, she walked past a group of boys who normally wouldn't notice her at all. One of them gave a low whistle. "That was brutal," he muttered, almost respectfully. Lyra kept walking, heart racing. She didn't know if they were mocking her or admiring her. It was a strange space to occupy, not invisible, not safe, but seen. In the classroom, Mrs. Gromova was absent. A substitute took her place, said she was on leave for the week. No one said why. Lyra sat in her usual spot. Kira glanced at her from 2 rows over and gave a quick nod. Not friendly. Not soft. But solid. A kind of wordless alliance. Later that day, Kirill found her at her locker. "You started something," he said quietly. She looked at him. "I didn't mean to." "Doesn't matter," he said. It's moving now. He handed her a folded piece of paper. On it were 2 columns. One was titled, "They do this to me too," the other, "What I want to say but can't." There were lines filled out in shaky, different handwritings. Anonymous confessions. They laugh when I stutter. I'm scared to raise my hand. My art was called disturbing. He said I'm not man enough for science. Lyra read in silence, her throat tight. Where did you get this? She asked. I passed it around. Quietly. People filled it out when no one was looking. She looked at him, stunned. Why? He gave a small smile. Because you made it okay to say something. That night, Lyra uploaded her story. It wasn't perfect, raw, emotional, full of trembling truths, but it was real. She posted it to a student blog, anonymously. She titled it, "The Ones Who Are Told to Be Quiet." By morning, it had over 300 views. And in her inbox, a message from someone she didn't know. I cried reading this. I thought I was the only one. But not everyone was pleased. On Thursday, the principal called Lyra into his office. He closed the door softly. Lyra, he began, voice calm and slow, we've had some reports. You've been making claims about staff. Accusing teachers. Posting online. Lyra sat still. I told the truth. The principal folded his hands. Truth is a tricky thing. It can cause disruption. She met his eyes. Maybe some things should be disrupted. He frowned, but didn't speak right away. Then, carefully. If this continues, there will be consequences. Lyra didn't flinch. I know. She stood. And walked out. The next few days felt like walking through a storm with no shelter. At first, the school tried to pretend nothing had happened. Lessons continued. Bells rang. Teachers smiled too tightly. But beneath the surface, everything had changed. Lyra felt it in the way eyes lingered too long. In the sudden silence when she entered a room. In the way even some students who had once supported her began pulling back. Fear was spreading. Whispers followed her, not admiration now, but doubt. She's overreacting. It's just school, it's not that serious. She's making it about herself. She wants attention. Lyra tried not to let it get to her. But she wasn't made of stone. At night, she stared at the ceiling, fists clenched under her blanket. Was it worth it? She thought of Kirill. Of Kira's messages. Of the anonymous confessions. Of the younger students who had started smiling at her in the halls. Yes. It was. But then came the meeting. Her mother was called to the school. They sat across from the principal, a school psychologist, and the vice principal. A wall of polite concern. Lyra's behavior has been disruptive, they said. She's encouraging other students to question authority. She may be experiencing emotional distress. Have you considered external counseling? Her mother listened silently, a storm gathering in her eyes. And then, calmly but clearly, she said. You're not concerned about her mental health. You're concerned she's telling the truth. The principal stiffened. The psychologist smiled too hard. We only want what's best for her. I think, her mother said coldly, that you're just not used to girls who don't sit still and smile. Lyra looked at her, stunned. Her mother, who had always told her to keep her head down, not cause trouble, was standing up for her. Later, as they walked home through the snow, her mother spoke again. You were right to speak. I didn't see it at first. I do now. Lyra blinked hard against the cold. That night, she received a message from Kira. The school told my parents to keep me out of your drama. They said you're dangerous. Then another. I told them I'm not afraid of girls who tell the truth. And then, it happened. A teacher, one Lyra barely knew, cornered her after class. You think you're changing something, he said, voice low, mocking. You're a child. No one takes children seriously. She stared at him, shaking. Not with fear, with anger. I'm not the only one anymore, she said. And you're scared. He opened his mouth, but didn't answer. She turned and walked away. That weekend, something new appeared on the school's unofficial student blog. A letter, signed not by one student, but by 12. 12 names. 12 stories. 12 voices saying, we are tired of being silenced. Lyra's name was at the top. So was Kirill's. And Kira's. And others she hadn't expected, a quiet girl from 8B, a boy from the science club, even one of the class clowns. The post exploded. Shared. Commented. Spread like wildfire. It's about time. I thought I was alone. You're not. But the next Monday, a new notice appeared on the school bulletin board. All unofficial student blogs are hereby banned. Anyone caught contributing may face disciplinary action. Lyra stared at it. The system was pushing back. Hard. She turned to Kirill, who stood beside her. He looked at her calmly. What now? Lyra exhaled. We don't stop. Spring came late that year. Snow still clung to the ground in April, but the air had changed. The silence in the hallways wasn't fear anymore, it was attention. Listening. Something had shifted, and everyone felt it. The banned blog didn't disappear, it just moved platforms. Now it had more than stories. It had testimonies. Scans of unfairly graded essays. Screenshots of inappropriate teacher comments. Drawings. Poems. Voices. Some posts were anonymous. Others weren't. And at the heart of it, still quiet, still not loud, was Lyra. Mrs. Gromova never returned. The official reason was retirement. No one believed it. Some teachers changed their tone. Some stayed the same. But they watched their words now. Students who used to be mocked for trying too hard were no longer so easy to dismiss. Kira started a small student union, unofficial, of course, that met every Friday. They talked about change, about fairness, about what kind of school they wanted to build. Lyra didn't lead it. She didn't want to be the face. But she was always there. Listening. Writing. Recording everything. And one day, something happened that stayed with her forever. A first-year girl approached her after class, holding a crumpled notebook. I drew this, the girl said nervously. It's kind of weird, but I read your story. I thought maybe. She trailed off. Lyra took the drawing. It was of a girl standing in the rain, small, but with fire in her eyes. Underneath it, the girl had written. I used to whisper. Now I want to speak. Lyra smiled, and for the first time, hugged a stranger. Later that night, at home, she sat at her desk, light pouring over her keyboard. She opened her story file. 30 pages now. She added one more line. They told me to sit down. I stood. They told me to be quiet. I wrote louder. She clicked save. Then leaned back, looking out the window. The snow was melting. Slow, but steady.